Hello, family. Welcome back to the Explore the Extraordinary podcast. My name's Betty, and today I'm joined by David. And David is a near-death experiencer and just an all-around awesome guy. I've had the opportunity to meet David in person, and I'm really excited for your willingness to come and serve our community at IANS and share about your experience, and we'll get into a dialogue. So I'm going to pass it right over to you. Thanks so much.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I definitely didn't have any expectation on, what was going to happen once I started sharing, but it's been overwhelming, amazing, exciting, and all of these things, scary sometimes even. But I guess I'll get right into just sharing the experience. Or is that what you wanted to do initially? Okay. So the my experience was and after sharing it so many times, I've seen so many different other things that I didn't really consider. I didn't consider a part of my experience, but sharing my experience, I remember that I drowned at age 6. And I didn't even integrate that as a traumatic experience at all. Because it was an NDE, it was a very calm voice that kind of walked me through the whole process. There was never any trauma. So, but in that experience, I remember seeing the kids. I was at a summer camp, and I remember seeing the kids swimming in the water. And I'm like, man, none of them can swim. They just like me. They can't swim. They just have life jackets on. That's why they have all this confidence in the water. So I put a life jacket on. Didn't know how to put it on. Nobody was there to kind of put it on for me, and I just jumped in the water really aggressively. And when I hit the water, the life jacket stayed at the top, and I kept going down. It just came right off. And as I'm going down, I can hold my breath. I remember as a kid, because I used to time it, but I could hold my breath for about a minute and 45, 50 seconds. I never got quite to 2 minutes as a kid, but and I was getting to that point where I was like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to hold my breath much longer. But I was just calmly saying this to myself. And then I heard a voice say that if things got black, things went black after a while, and then I heard a voice say, um, if you could touch the bottom, you could just push yourself back up. And I responded to the voice, and the voice was extremely relaxed and a calm voice, peaceful voice, and it kept me calm. But I responded to the voice. It doesn't seem like I'm going to touch the bottom. I'm just going down. And as soon as I said that, I stopped and I started floating back up. And as I'm floating up, uh, at some point, I guess I either regain consciousness or my attention just moves up, and I could see light coming through the top of the water. And that was refreshing because only thing I was seeing prior to that was just blackness. And then I saw the rings because somebody splat. They put a pole in the water, and the rings from that splash captivated me. Like they were just growing and growing and growing and growing in circle after circle after circle. And I watched that for a while, and not knowing that it had any meaning to me, or at all. But later it does, because it's a recurring kind of a symbol, but for me. But then I put my hand in the middle of the circle and I hit a stick, and they pulled me out. And once they pulled me out, I don't remember being resuscitated, any kind of CPR, anything. I just coughed a couple times and I sighed. Had a deep inhale and exhale, and I sat there. And then I could feel all of this tension behind me. So I looked behind me, and there were people just in pieces. They were crying. People were holding each other. They thought I was dead. And I asked my brother, like, well, how long was I under the water? Because I asked him like last year. I asked him, I said, were you there? Did I drown? He said, yeah. Yeah. I said, well, how long was I under the water? He said, no less than 3 or 4 minutes. And it was significant because, like I said, I couldn't hold my breath for more than 2 minutes at all, ever. And so I knew that after I was an adult, I knew that was a significant experience. And the things that came after that experience confirms it, because I didn't know how to explain these things. But they were after I had this drowning experience. But I started seeing images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during the Holocaust, the nuclear Holocaust, and at age 6. And this was really traumatic for me because it felt like I was there and I would go into these fits where I would just be screaming. My mother told me about this. She said I would just be screaming, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die," over and over and over, and just shaking, and my heart would be beating so fast. She said she just didn't. It was nothing she could do to console me. And at that time, I was also having visions of the future, and it was a lot of a lot of death. And what I saw at age 6 and how I described it was humans. I saw human death, like death on both sides of the road, and I called it human roadkill. You know, and uh, and I didn't see any responses to it. Like nobody seemed to notice it. Like there would be in the visions that I was having, there would be times where I might have been in a car with groups of people, and they're just singing songs or talking about the the day, and there's dead bodies on both sides of the road. So this had become something that humans have been used to, have been accustomed to, and it was jarring for me to see these things with vivid. It was all vivid to me as a child, to the point where I made up memories about how I learned about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because I didn't know I was learning about it through these fits, these experience, these visions. But my mother gave us encyclopedias when we were kids, but those encyclopedias weren't with us when we moved to Germany. So the memory that I created was that I read about Hiroshima and Nagasaki in encyclopedias that my mother gave us. Those were in North Carolina. We were living in Hanau, Germany at the time. So that memory was made up. Like I didn't know where those memories were coming from, but they instilled in me a deep kind of interest and concern about nuclear energy and nuclear power. So I was at age in my teens reading about thorium as an alternative to uranium, wondering why we didn't use thorium instead of uranium, and these things were like really personally important to me, you know, and didn't have people I could talk to about this stuff, of course. So most of my weirdest interests and orientations, I just kind of had them, you know, they were just mine. And even black holes, as a teen, I drew a picture, and I wish it was near me, but I drew a picture of what I thought, how I thought black holes functioned in the universe. And it was I didn't think they could be random, you know. It was a series of black holes, and I drew arrows to show arrows at the event horizons to show how I felt like they influenced each other. And for me, it was like they had to have a relationship, and it couldn't be random. So there was a function for them. And the way that I illustrated the way that they interacted with each other was almost like, for me, it was entropy and organization. It was how the universe breathes. The black holes, some pull from each other, some pull. You know, the pulling from one to the other is like it creates a pulsation. You know, and that was just a thought that I had at probably age 18, 19, and I drew this image out, and I would explain it to a couple people. And like 8 years later, NASA did an article about black holes kind of like being the churns of creation. And that was the exact thing that I drew, was a bunch of circles that looked like churns, you know, that were interacting with each other that I thought were black holes. And if I had extrapolated that image out, you know, a lot, it would have even looked like something that was mentioned by Terrence Howard and Drunvalo Melchizedek, the flower of life. But I didn't have any conception of that at the time. I wasn't trying to make it look like anything. It just looked like the flower of life, because these black holes to me were in a series. And okay, so all of that kind of shaped my disposition from a childhood. I was depressed pretty much from age 6 moving forward because of all the death that I was having visions about, and it didn't allow me to connect with life and wanting to do things, like wanting to be something when I grew up. I didn't really have a lot of that ideation. As deep as it got was, I think, a book I had read as a kid talked about firemen, and I was like, okay, I could be a fireman. And then as I got a little older, I started playing football, and I was good at it. Didn't really have passion to play it forever. I always said if I did go pro, I would only play a couple years, you know, and just do something else. But I was good at it. So then I was like, okay, I'll play football. You know, I had some colleges recruiting me, and then ended up not playing football either. Nothing really. I had no passion, and you know, and I don't know if it was, like I said, because of just being turned off from this life due to the 6-year-old NDE, and also growing up in the town that I grew up in, there was a lot of racism, and that was kind of what fueled some of the anger and the stuff that ultimately led to the second NDE. is I saw the KKK multiple times as a child. Outside of that stuff, it was an idyllic kind of childhood. I played in the woods all the time. I was, fascinated by nature. I was digging holes and trying to find fossils, and any little piece of glass or rock that I liked, it was all a treasure to me. And I collected all these things. But seeing the KKK and seeing how my family interacted with that energy and vice versa, I absorbed it all. And I just assumed that hating each other, that's just the game. That's just what happens here. And that's what we're going to do. And and it just became extreme, way too extreme in me, to where it affected, blood pressure. It affected everything. Like, anytime I was around white people, it made me almost sick, because of the anger that I had, absorbed from seeing the KKK experience and hearing stories of people being denied opportunities, people being killed, people being raped, people, even my grandmother telling stories of the landowner, because my biological grandmother and grandfather were sharecroppers. So my cousins and I, for all intents and purposes, are the first generation of my family out of slavery. Because sharecropping, when you hear the stories, it wasn't vastly different than some of the things that you hear about happening during slavery. But the stories that I heard and all of this stuff, and then I grew up. I was very smart as a kid. Grew up reading all of these the histories and uh, African-centered scholars, and my perspective just got extreme. Um, I just hated all white people. It was my mind allowed me to turn the everyday white person, the school teacher, the bus driver, anybody, into a part of my oppression, and I was able to create a link, and it made me immediately just start feeling anger pretty much anywhere I went where I saw white people, and it just wasn't healthy. It ultimately led to my digestive system not working properly. I had 2 stones in my gallbladder. I ultimately had to get that removed. And then a few years later is when I had the heart attack that led to the near-death experience. First, the valve ripped on February 1st, 2017. And then 7 days later, February 1st, the valve ripped. And then February 7th, I had a heart attack. And it was in that moment that when I came out of my body and I looked down, like some of the thoughts that I had are what made it clear to me that how I lived and the things that I thought, and the bias is what led to my death. So looking at my body, one of the first thoughts that I had was, this is how it happens, and that was a really fleeting kind of human thought. It felt like, and then it was the thought was, you used to be there. His body, mind, and ego is dead. And then I asked, well, what remains? What am I now? And the words that I heard were all in concert, and it sounded like my voice even. And it was just soul, light, energy, spirit, consciousness, awareness, and it all just kind of flooded in at the same time. And I understood exactly what was being related to me. And then the next phrase that I heard was, "You killed yourself with your personality," and I knew immediately what that meant. I had been angry, depressed, sad, miserable my whole life, and I didn't participate. I just checked out and kind of threw rocks from the sidelines. In that state, I didn't think I even could come up with a healthy way to participate. All I wanted to do was fight. I thought war was all the way that we related to each other was violence. That's all I wanted to do. And then I got to a point where it was like, that didn't even make sense to me, because I didn't think, I didn't think anybody was as angry as me, so I didn't feel like anybody was going to fight the way I wanted to fight. So then I started thinking about, well, who could I kill? It's just, I had lost my mind, but the anger, it did it. And so for me, it was very clear to me what was meant when I heard the phrase, "You killed yourself with your personality." And so I was out of my body at that point. So I watched all of this, the resuscitation effort, the defibrillation. And then I kind of casually looked up, and I was gone in space. And initially I was in the void, black hole, the kind of area that was very dense blackness that felt tangible as I moved through it, almost like moving through velvet. That was communicating and felt like love as well. And I've spent a lot of my time in my outside of my body in the void and then staring into the void. And then I moved after I started traveling. I was fixated on traveling and just moving. And every time I would say it would be like the distance between me and the thing that had my attention would disappear, and I would be there and I would understand what it was. And so I was just eventually was just saying and moving all through space and amazed by everything. It all felt like love. It all felt like home. Um, I felt like I woke up for the first time, and I didn't really remember after leaving the void. I didn't really remember any of the human stuff. I didn't remember the trauma. I didn't remember the bias. I didn't remember any of it. But and there are people who seem to have anxiety about that idea. But if there's a thought where that creates any kind of tension, that gets reconciled. So if let's say I did remember and I say I miss my uncle such and such, the satisfaction of having his presence would already have been felt. That's the way I experienced. There was no missing anything. There was no absence. There was no anxiety. There were no thoughts that could even remotely resemble how I thought as a human. I didn't even have a memory to refer what I was seeing to. I couldn't say, oh, I remember this from science class. This looks like a picture of a star forming. No, I didn't have any access to David's human experience at that point. It was strictly attention, and wherever my attention went, my experience happened, and I enjoyed that a lot. I saw the light, and because I was enjoying traveling a lot, I didn't really move towards the light. I could feel a pull in that direction, but I didn't. I didn't move that direction. I just wanted to keep traveling. I watched a woman in the room where I was being resuscitated holding her face for the entire experience. But toward the end of the experience, I was staring at her trying to communicate to her, and I couldn't figure out how to get her to hear me. But I wanted her to know that nothing that was happening to me was bad. This was an amazing experience, the best thing that ever happened in my life. And I couldn't get her to hear me, so they resuscitated me. And I just blurted out, "Are you okay?" And I was looking for her because I wanted her to be okay, that I was leaving. But my attention was in the emergency room. So it seemed as though as soon as they resuscitated me, I was back in my body and blurting out, still trying to communicate to her. So the words just, "Are you okay?" came immediately out. But the first thought that I had when I opened my eyes and looked at the guy in front of me, I was like, damn, they woke me up. Like, they really woke me up, because for a minute I did not think that I was dead. I thought I just was sleeping, and it was the best dream, best sleep that I'd ever had for a moment. But then when I saw the defibrillator, this pad on my chest, because when I asked the lady if she was okay, then I asked the guy holding the defibrillator pads if he was okay, and he cut me off and said, "Are you okay?" And then somebody from the right said, "You didn't feel that?" And then I was about to just immediately respond and say, "Feel what?" But I just looked down and I saw this gel kind of like pad on my chest that had the two indentions from the defibrillator pads in it. So that's when it kind of flooded into my human mind. Oh yeah, you did just die. And from there it's been a landing, trying to figure out what happened to me for 3.5 years. I was deeply depressed because I just wanted to go back. And after that depression started to subside, it was more, okay, now I got to learn how to be here because I don't have any passion I don't have any attachment to these ideas. I don't even have an attachment to the occupation that I had for 20 years prior before my NDA. I don't even care if I'm doing that or not. I don't. So it's like I've been in talking to a friend of mine who had a near-death experience that I met, because I started sharing mine on Clubhouse, and I met a guy named Zachariah. And he had a near-death experience that is fascinating and complementary to mine in strange ways. But we talked a lot trying to understand what had happened to us. And we looked at science, medicine, we looked at psychology. We really were deeply trying to understand what happened to us. So we were always on the phone every day, just about. And that has helped me heal, because it went from that depression and wanting to go back and wanting to die to, well, let me just learn how to live. Let me learn a new language. Let me learn some new ideas. Let me learn how my brain works. I've been carrying it around for 40 plus years and don't even know, what's going on up there. Let me learn how my nervous system works. Let me learn how this triggered state that I was in for so long, how it killed me. Let me learn that so that perhaps I can explain to other people how they're killing themselves with their thoughts the way I did. So,
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for sharing about the childhood experience, because I've never heard you share about that before. So, and I love how coming into awareness and beginning to share about our experiences opens up all these other doors that are
yeah.
deeply buried in our subconscious. So that was really amazing to be able to hear. So a couple of things that I wrote down. Well, the first thing I wrote down was you said that you had no passion in life before your experience. And I'm wondering if you can explain what your passion is today.
What's funny is that it's different today. I think passion and emotion and feelings ultimately are almost what I point to as what killed me, right? So now the way that I even engage the idea is what's more important to me now is making sure that anything that I do put my attention on um, is hope based. Like any ideas that I share, they're hope based, and I'm speaking with a sense of responsibility, not with the intention or with even accidentally to inject any kind of anxiety or fear. There is no anxiety and fear, in me. I've died. I understand what death is. There's nothing to fear in that, so I can act responsibly. I can respond to moments the way I need to respond without there being any tension in that, because the worst thing that can happen I've experienced and it was beautiful. So I can respond now without any hesitation to help people. And I think that taking that same orientation and just into life, I've studied spirituality most of my life, even when I was in a triggered, angry state. I was trying to figure these things out. So now, without the triggered states, even texts that I owned since I was a teenager, reading them now outside of being angry and being in that state, I understand the text. It's just different. It's a completely and utterly different experience to be in that state and then to not be in that state and then to experience life. And now I actually have, I wouldn't even call it passion. It's just an orientation that compels me to be responsible here and operate with virtues and values and to want to collaborate and work with others. So it's not really passion in the sense it's more like loyalty in this system, to the system that allows life to happen, because life to me now is what I would say I'm most passionate about, if there is any passion that I can engage here. I'm very passionate about life as being the gifter. Like, it gifts us with the the opportunity to create words and religions and stories about reality and life. And then we take those stories and weaponize them, or do whatever we do with them. But the gift is life, you know.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. I love the way that you just put that. And it's reminding me of a lot of different channelers. And they say, follow your joy, follow your highest excitement. That's what life is really about. So I kind of want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about the narrative of transformation and what that's like. So I had a really similar experience where my life before was poverty, racism, drug addiction, and my experience transformed my life 180 degrees. Not everybody has an opportunity to die in order to dismantle their thought systems. So maybe we can talk a little bit about, I'm really curious about your relationship with your family after your experience, because if this is the way that you were before, I'm sure that you had expressed your thoughts and views the way that they were. And, maybe even some of it came from your family. I know in my case, all of
Mm.
my views came from my family. I never had an opportunity to think for myself. So I'm curious, what was that shift like for you?
I would say I was probably the most angry person in my life. So for most people who see me more in a more lighthearted state, it's a welcome thing for them. There are people who are shocked to hear me say certain things that really are clear indications that I just don't think the way that I used to think. And then there's certain conversations that I sometimes railroad it because there are people who may not have talked to me in years who come back and they want to continue talking to me in the same way that I used to talk, in terms of pointing fingers and hating and, and I don't really see I don't see any benefit in pointing fingers at anybody. If the problem is in my community, I'm right there. I can do some action instead of waiting for some outside variable to come fix my problems. My orientation now is hope and responsibility. So I don't I don't see anything. I mean, if it's a problem that needs to be fixed, then there's action that needs to be had, not a bunch of emotions that need to be felt, not a bunch of fingers that need to be pointed, unless you're pointing at the problem so you can show somebody else where to go to get to work. But I think that that orientation is what's changed in me, because before I was more so focused on the anger surrounding why the situation exists in the first place. Um, but and that doesn't really create action, and unless you want to go kill the people who you think created the problem. And that was really the only ideation that I probably was having in my anger and my rage was not helping people around me that are suffering in similar ways that I'm suffering, but going out somewhere and following some hero's journey to some castle on some mythical mountain and finding this great white KKK magical wizard and killing him. And out of all of the problems that Black people have, it was no rational thought there. You know, if there's a problem around me, I can get to work. I can fix the problems around me. Once you give yourself agency and you give yourself sovereignty over this experience, it doesn't make sense to point fingers at anybody. You know that you're co-creating everything that's happening here, and you just get to creating. You get to doing. Doing is a faster way of manifesting than sitting and thinking about manifesting. Just go manifest it. So if you want to change reality, the actions, our habits, our interactions with each other are the fastest way to start moving things in a different direction. We can sit and pray and meditate and think about peace and love all day too, but we still got to get out and do love. We got to be love. We got to be these things and not just sit in our isolated vacuums, meditating and praying, assuming that's the only thing that has to happen. This is an interactive team event, and we have to get that.
Yeah, it even says it in I think it probably says it in every kind of holy scripture, but faith without works is dead. We have action is what it's all about. And that's the balance, even the balance of the feminine and the masculine energy, the feminine being the idea and the masculine being the action. And that's the balance that we have as a spirit. So I really like that. I'm curious, have you deduced what is the spiritual purpose of things like racism or this separation?
I don't even believe it exists. It's just a perceptual thing. I think there are perceptual things that lead to certain ideas that can get crystallized, especially if there's anybody that has a motive or have any trauma. If trauma can bring people together in very tight circles, that and in those tight circles, all of the beautiful ideals that exist as universals are practiced there. But the difficulty or the problem with that is that outside of that circle, they don't know how to practice those ideals and expand that love outside of that circle. And I think for me, engaging all of these ideas, spiritual ideas and concepts without trauma and bias and narrative and the narratives that were created through just normal historical movement, human movements and historical, human behaviors. When we remove the emotional response to all that stuff, it's just human behavior. And if we go back 10,000 years, we'll see that it's been happening. We probably, some of the oldest texts that were written about 10,500 years ago, and they were already talking about people killing each other over ideas. So it's like this thing that we are witnessing now, and because some people say that the last 400 years are the epitome of human chaos, and I don't know, we've had apocalypses in different epochs over and over, and they've been written about. So humans have been doing as bad as they've ever been doing many times over, And we're just at one of those points. But to say that there's not been the kind of suffering that we're witnessing in history would be a it would be misrepresentation of history. And I think that because we don't necessarily look at history objectively, we kind of take our paradigms, our biases, our even our racial orientations, and try to take it 10,000, 7,000, 5,000 years ago, and it doesn't exist back there in the ways that we look at stuff. But then you can't decipher history with those biases when you take them back 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. You ain't going to be able to decipher history in any kind of authentic way. So after I got detached from the bias and I looked at history, I'm like, the suffering seems to have started with bad storytelling. As soon as when we had these stories that talked about all of us as being, or that talked about there was no protagonist, antagonist that were diametric and could never reconcile. All of the more ancient stories were a brother and a brother, a brother and a sister, a husband and a wife, a sister and a sister. They were always related because they were always, the issue was always reconcilable. You know, the story was not about somebody doing something and he was so horrible that he needed to be destroyed, you know, forever. And then the good point came and fixed things. It was never really that. It was a mistake made perhaps by the older sibling or the one side, and then they get punished or isolated or exiled for that mistake. And then the younger brother or the partner comes and tries to fix things. They make mistakes too. Lessons are learned from both sides, and then a middle path is learned. You know, you know, and that seems to be what each culture has. The stories of the Egyptian is the tale of two brothers, Sumerian, the Incan, Enlil, and there's so many others. Even on South American ancient stories have these two brothers stories as well. Popol Vuh, I believe, speaks of a two brother story. But as long as it's two brothers, though, there's reconciliation possible. But when you turn it into these two black and white, or good and evil, or devil and the God, like reconciliation becomes very difficult. You know, or chosen versus unchosen. You know, the reconciliation becomes different. But when you look at the stories from their inceptions, their oldest, how they were presented to us in their oldest forms, that irreconcilability, it doesn't exist. You know, we always have that possibility there, that hope is always present. It's a matter of us and how we are going to see reality, how we're going to learn and change and modify and pivot collectively. So for me, that pivot, that change, is what allowed me to, for one, is to stop going back into history and looking at everything, ancient texts, and using all of it to buttress bias, to buttress a trauma narrative, to buttress my already rigidly formed opinions, and go back to it now and just learn, without the bias, without the trauma, without the attachment to trauma and all of that, and just what happened. And what I see, what happened is what keeps happening in epochs, maybe 2,400 year epochs. We do the same things. So, and
yeah, thank you for this. I love this conversation. I'm curious if maybe, because like I said, not everybody has an opportunity to die and have their awareness shifted 180 degrees. And I don't think that it's just that simple anyway. Even when you do have an experience like this, there's still upkeep and education and all of these things that we have to do to start to dismantle the system and build up a new system. So what would you say to somebody who's maybe, perceiving a struggle with letting go of some of these ideas that they've had their whole lives? Do you have any kind of tangible tools to help?
Yeah, like for me, it's like thinking about what I want versus putting all of my attention on the things that I see that I don't like. You know, what I want is to see a peaceful reality, equal, just reality where everybody's able to thrive. You know, that's what I want. So what I see, and most of the time that I've lived in most places that I've lived, like the town that I grew up in, again, is one of the poorest towns, one of the poorest counties. Caswell County is one of the poorest counties in the country, and I think it was the poorest county when I was growing up, or at least I've seen a documentary about some of the housing crises and stuff, people losing homes and stuff there, and it said that it was the poorest county in the country at that time. I don't remember the date of the documentary, but for me, when you grow up and you see hopelessness to the extent that I've seen it, and you feel hopelessness to the extent that I felt it. The fixing that or helping change that is really just seeing your community, seeing yourself, seeing the people around you as sacred and helping them. And the more you fix the problems that exist around you, you put good chemicals in your body. You get dopamine rewards for helping people. Once you're in that state, there is no depression, there is no anger really possible. And you really just see every quote unquote problem that humanity presents you with, or the society presents you with, as an opportunity to fix something. And with the sense of hope and responsibility, fixing things it doesn't anger me. It actually, if there's anything that I feel passion for now, would be if I'm presented with a problem, I really do feel responsible for fixing it, or helping someone fix it, or pushing them in a direction where they may be able to fix it. But to be angry about it, there's no that doesn't make sense to me anymore, because that doesn't allow me to have access to executive functioning, which is where I would be fixing it. Not in the limbic region where the emotions and the feelings and the anger comes from. I'm not going to fix problems there. I'm going to have to calm my nervous system, breathing, whatever exercises that people do, um, meditation, deep breathing, whatever, just pausing and giving yourself a moment to relax, to get control of your thoughts versus just to have immediate reactions, so that you can respond appropriately. Like for me, extrapolating that whole orientation up and down to where we're just looking at problems, and we're looking at solving problems versus writing narratives and storytelling and triggering people and invoking all of these emotions and stuff over how we feel about these problems. Let's just fix the problems. Let's just fix the problems. Because without the emotion and the anger, I probably would have been able to fix problems. I probably would have felt compelled and maybe even had passion to go to schools for science and all these other things. If I thought that I mattered, if I loved myself, if I loved life, I would have wanted to participate more in it. But I didn't have an opportunity. I wasn't presented a circumstance that gave me that kind of love for life and love for humans and so I hate it. And I retreated, and I stayed away and participated only from on the sidelines throwing rocks, but I just want to give people hope. I want to and I think that, to me, it's not about not seeing the problems. It's just about how we respond to them, versus reacting to them emotionally and angrily and with the bias that they often create. I grew up in a town of maybe 3,000-4,000 people. To say that my experience there allows me to rationally say all white people are a certain way, that's not a big enough sample. Like, I haven't had a broad enough experience to speak about all of anybody, all of anything. And so it becomes a thing now where I just question my thoughts as they even arise. Is that even a valid thought? Probably not. I don't have that experience.
That's actually really useful. And it's a good way to kind of reframe. And I think the thing that was coming up for me while you're talking, and I absolutely 1,000% agree with you, but in my head, playing devil's advocate,
Yeah.
like, what's the opposite? And I think that people just feel powerless when they look at this huge, gigantic picture. You can't look at the whole world, right? If you want to enact change, you got to look at what you can do. And
Exactly.
then even take it a step further, what you can do in your community. But you can't go all the way into like this huge thought of this gigantic system that's running the entire earth. You just got to stay focused in the present, count your fingers, count your toes. What can I do right here in my physical space?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you sharing about some tangible ways to pause and recenter and come back. I think that's really important. I want to see if maybe we have some time to share about some of the other mystical experiences that have happened to you since putting yourself out there. I'm sure that this has just opened up a lot of doors, and I just want to see if there's anything else that you'd like to share about.
I always tell people, like, when I was 4 and 5, I was having lucid dreams and sleep paralysis and scary stuff for me at that time. And I knew people's thoughts, and I knew when people were lying. So my whole life has been mystical, and having mystical experiences. but it confused me as a kid. And I remember praying to God at around 5 or 6, to take it all away. I don't want to have any of these gifts that people talk about, because nobody was able really ever to make the gifts uh work for me. Like it didn't ever, it was just information for me that was overwhelming, that I didn't often understand where it was coming from, you know. So after my NDE, like one of the things that people speak about that I've been tormented with much of my life, at least from my perspective growing up, was it was tormented to me. I didn't think it was a gift, was being an empath. Um, After the NDE, I was hearing and feeling and thinking a lot of stuff that I know had nothing to do with me and my experiences. And it was back to being tormented like it was when I was a child. And because I had kind of taught myself how to ignore extra information. I don't know how I did it, but it got to a point where I didn't pay attention to stuff. And but this time it was like, it was louder, it was more disruptive. And but I realized in that, like, what being an empath was. Like, I've been isolated for so long that uh, you get this information, you go out to work, come home, and now you have this information in you, but you don't know where it is, and it just stays in you, you know. But I didn't know. Like, I didn't know where the source of it was. I didn't know how to handle or process this information. But I think now, because the experience seemed to detach me from ideology, detach me from ego to a certain extent, not fully, because I'm still David in some ways, in a lot of ways. But I don't. The biggest thing to me here is life. There are no days, there are no others. I don't like to speak in ways that insinuates anything remotely similar to that. I try to speak responsibly. I try to share ideas responsibly, because I don't want to be a part of any problems here, you know. But the gift stuff to me now is like, um, what made it matter is getting rid of attachment to ideas. If I don't have any ideas inside of me, feeling other people's stuff is no longer torment. I have space for it. And so now with being an empath, for me, it's like, if you are an empath, that means you're going to absorb ideas, information, energy. Um, the best bet for an empath that's deeply empathic, that is really have a strong pull for this type of energy and information, is to get rid of what you have, get rid of the bias, get rid of attachment to ideas, get rid of um, trauma narratives that make one idea more important than another idea. Like, if you're an empath, that's too much information to be holding inside while you're constantly gathering information. So by not holding information inside of me, I've been a better conduit for information that's coming through me, to me, and it's flowing in me all the time since I was a child. I'm a reflector in human design, and it seems like the implications of that are more apparent. I didn't really understand what it meant, and I still am not deeply, involved in human design. But I've had people explain to me some of the implications of that stuff, and best way for me to be is the way that I've learned to be since my NDE, and that's not to be attached to information, because I'm going to always have it being it's going to always be pouring through me constantly. So if I'm holding it, I'm blocking processes. I'm blocking my own natural way, you know? So I just don't want to have bias. So for me, some of the mystical stuff is really even just grounding my understanding of mystical stuff. Like, because what I noticed in sharing my story is that people sometimes are distracted by the mystical stuff. But what is revealed to me over and over and over and over and over is that demons, we can't keep pointing finger at demons when it comes to bad human behavior, and God is not going to come fix problems that are our responsibility to fix. So it ain't going to really be a lot of mystical things that's going to fix this reality that we are operating in. It's going to be us learning how to behave properly with each other, learning virtues, values, morals, and learning how to speak to each other better. Because I think one thing that Zachariah and I have come to is that sometimes the language that we use to describe each other's experiences dismisses the other person's experience. And but moral injury is something that all human beings in we deal with. If 75 as a 74% or something of Christians here, that means that they're exposed to morals. That doesn't even consider race. That means 75% of Americans are exposed to morals. If this society isn't operating in a way that most people would say is moral, if we have politicians and leaders that are not moral, and we all see this, and now both sides are playing our emotions as it relates to the immorality of the leadership of this country, and you are moral. You feel inside you're a Christian, you're moral, and which is 75% of the people. Everybody, even the other percentages, are still moral people. Other religions, small percent of atheists, but there's Muslims, Jews, and Christians. That covers almost all of Americans, which are all moral orientations, right? But if you're in a society that you don't see that morality being infused in it, you're going to experience moral injury. That's every human being. 80 to 90% of human beings are experiencing moral injury, which is suffering. It creates a type of suffering that no real physical external pointing finger to suffering can measure. This is an internal suffering that affects their entire filter lens through which they experience reality, and compounds their suffering. And it's not tangible, but in all the time, and it's not measurable, but you can't question that. When you feel and see someone as an empath, you feel it. You walk past people and it just feels like the noise of the energy of somebody scratching the chalkboard, or just a loud noise, and you feel it. That's suffering. And I don't get into this. Your people haven't suffered like my people think, so I dismiss your whole history, or dismiss your whole. And a lot of us get into that, this pain Olympic stuff, and we got to stop that, because suffering, to me now, when I look at it, I think about moral injury, and that can be any one of us trying to function, trying to pay our bills in a society that we don't really see as moral anymore. But we have to exist here. We have to pay our bills here, and sometimes we have to compromise what we consider our virtues, our values, our morals, in order to do these things, in order to function here. Because, so for me, it's like, trying to address these types of things, seeing each other, humanizing each other's stories, humanizing each other. If we have mystical gifts, that can help, as we're engaging the very basic things that are going to fix reality here, great. But it's not going to be the mystical stuff, I think, that's going to fix things. It's going to be us waking up and just seeing each other holistically, and loving each other, engaging properly, more gracefully.
Wow, you just blew my mind in a bunch of ways, because you put it real simply. And the thing that you said about, empaths kind of dismantling their bias towards a situation. So if you hear someone's experience and you're like, oh my God, that's so terrible, and then you take that in, you don't need to judge it as anything. We don't need to be judges. We don't at all. Experience is just experience. And if we give people their spiritual autonomy to say, wow, okay, that soul signed up for that experience, and I honor their experience, and you don't need to place judgment or bias on it at all. That is so helpful, and you put it so simply. So I really thank you for that. And yeah, we have a friend in common, a spiritual rapper named Jay Clay, and he
Yes.
has a song called Let Go. And one of his lyrics in the song is, people having a bad past contest like they're about to win a prize. And and you just said that too, this pain contest. Why are we trying to outdo each other?
Yeah.
Sad stories. That doesn't seem like what the human experience can. It can be so much more. So I love everything that you just said. I love spending time with you together today. I want to see if there's anything else that you'd like to share to feel more complete about this time together.
No, just for me, I think the fundamental shift is I moved from a fear and anxiety orientation, anger, emotional, to a more hope, responsibility orientation. And I think that if any idea you entertain, any idea that you consider, and you consider it strongly enough to want to spread, is it going to inspire hope, and responsibility, or is it going to inspire fear and anxiety? Ask that question. And if you are spreading fear and anxiety, you know, that's part of what keeps us from being able to function here at our best. So try to spread hope and try to instill responsibility in people as it relates to the problems that people are complaining about, so that we won't just point fingers. We'll get up and we'll engage in habits and activities and behaviors that actually address the problems. So.
Really well said. I'm so grateful for you and your service to our community, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you again for having me, and love you. You take care.